That's not to say that people aren't responsible for what they do with their situations, but if you're helping them do those things, you bear some responsibility for it. Anyway, to continue. So every year, asylum seekers and refugees flee to Belize, Mexico, and the U.S., where many have relatives, or to Costa Rica and Panama in search of safety and a better life. Many families leave together. Others travel solo. Deprived, detained, unprotected, and often alone, the children who make these journeys are easy prey to traffickers and others who are out to abuse and exploit them. Children returned to their countries of origin often face community stigmatization, social exclusion, and renewed risk of violence. UNICEF works with national and local governments and civil society partners to support and protect these children and to address the root causes that drive them to flee, with or without their parents, in the first place. Yeah. UNICEF offices in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico have expanded their work to meet the increasingly urgent needs. The work reflects a comprehensive approach that seeks to protect and support children where they are going, and at critical points along the way. That means preventing and responding to violence, addressing poverty and improving life opportunities at home, strengthening access to services and providing care to children while they are in transit, supporting children during reintegration if they are returned to their home countries, and if they are not, supporting their social integration and protecting them from discrimination and xenophobia at their destination. UNICEF is also advocating the further investment by countries in their national child protection systems to reduce exploitation and violence, while calling for increasing accessibility and availability of alternatives to detention to move toward ending the practice of detaining children because of their immigration status. Well, that's really working well here, isn't it? Here's a look at some of the work being done on the ground. For many children living in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, school is a very dangerous place. Violent gangs are known to target schools, bullying students, stealing their money, issuing threats, and creating a climate of fear. As a result, many students stop attending class or begin to behave aggressively or even choose to join a gang. Try to remember what it was like to be in school and then add all that stuff onto it, and you see where these kids are at. UNICEF has been working for years with municipal governments and schools in Central America to break that cycle of violence by creating and supporting safe spaces where kids can engage in educational and vocational activities, free from fear of gangs and gang-related threats. UNICEF Honduras offers skills training, cultural and arts programs to help empower adolescents. With partners Mujeres en las Artes, the country office runs community programs in 12 of the country's most violent municipalities, engaging thousands of children, adolescents, and adults. UNICEF programs also provide targeted support to strengthen national and local child protection systems to protect children from different forms of violence. In response to a report that showed widespread use of corporal punishment and its negative impact on children's emotional development, UNICEF launched a program in Honduras that teaches nonviolent methods of discipline to parents, teachers, and community leaders, which is helping to end the practice. This is so weird. Okay, for many refugees and asylum seekers, the journey ends with apprehension and detention in Mexico or the U.S. Nearly 64,000 migrants from Central America, including 11,000 women and children, were returned from the two countries between January and April 2018 alone, a 39% increase over the same period the previous year. When young people are deported, they are often stigmatized by the community or are socially excluded. They may be targets of violence or remain internally displaced and impoverished. UNICEF provides migrant children with specialized psychosocial support to address the trauma and stigma. In El Salvador, UNICEF is working to provide safe spaces. Nothing like a little dry air here. In El Salvador, UNICEF is working to provide safe spaces, recreational activities, flexible education programs, and vocational training options to the most vulnerable children and young people, including those who recently returned from other countries. Legal assistance, emotional counseling, and other support programs for displaced families are being expanded. A digital tracking system is being developed to facilitate case management between reception centers and municipal services to more effectively manage the reintegration of migrant children. In Guatemala, UNICEF and partners are supporting government efforts to strengthen its cash assistance programs. Bono Seguro, designed to help families in need. The program specifically aims to ensure that children living in poverty and extreme poverty receive health services and education. UNICEF has also supported the development of municipal offices across the country to protect children and adolescents, promoting programs that prevent violence and detect and refer cases that need special protection. Today, 40% of Guatemala's municipal governments have these protection offices. And they go on and on and on about what they're doing, and we don't need to hear everything UNICEF is up to, but that's a list of things that are going on. So you say, oh, well, yeah, but that's, they're trying to get money, they're wanting money, that's why they're making it sound like that. Well, I just, as an off thing, just as a novel idea, I thought, okay, what about just some completely sort of disinterested voice? What would they have to say? This is from Lonely Planet. This is the travel website, Lonely Planet, entitled Dangers and Annoyances. And it lists 6 things here. 1, parts of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala are plagued by high crime rates and gang activity. Visitors are rarely affected, but some have been victims of grab-and-run theft, assault, rape, carjacking, and murder. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Capital cities tend to have the highest crime rates. Many sexual assaults occur on isolated beaches. Avoid night buses, with the possible exception of Mexico and Panama, as highway robberies often happen at night. Avoid drug use entirely. Seek out updates from other travelers, tourist offices, police, guest house owners, etc. Certain parts of Darien Province on the Panama-Colombia border are restricted. Travel requires special permission from Servicios Nacional de Fronteras in Panama City. In Nicaragua, in April 2018, political clashes between anti-government supporters and Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega led to violence and death. Consult your government's travel advisory service before considering travel. I mean, this is a travel agency. They're just advising travelers here. This is not somebody with an agenda. They're just, hey, you might not want to go to these places. Drugs, marijuana, and cocaine are available in many places, but are illegal everywhere in the region, and penalties are severe. Recent reforms to drug laws in Mexico stipulate that first-time offenders are not punished for possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use, but that doesn't mean the cops won't shake you down for a bribe. Avoid any conversation with someone who offers you drugs. If you are in an area where drug trafficking is prevalent, how would you know that? Ignore it and do not show any interest, since drugs are sometimes used to set up travelers for blackmail and bribery. Legal concerns aside, purchasing recreational drugs supports groups that engage in human trafficking and child prostitution and contributes to violence and political unrest throughout the region. This is a travel agency. The following government websites, blah, 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 they're offering more information. And the natural hazards, they're talking about earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, etc. Police and military, I like this one. Corruption is a serious problem among Latin American police, who are generally poorly paid and poorly supervised. In many countries, they are not reluctant to plant drugs on unsuspecting travelers or enforce minor regulations to the letter in hope of extracting comillas, or bribes. If you are stopped by someone claiming to be a plainclothes policeman, never get into a vehicle with them. Don't give them any documents or show them any money, and don't take them to your hotel. If the officer appears to be the real thing, insist on going to a police station on foot. I'm laughing. It's not funny at all, but I mean, I'm just saying this is a travel agency, a travel website warning you of the dangers of visiting these places. So if you don't believe anybody else, everybody else has got an agenda. Oh, we're a bunch of liberals. This is about as nonpartisan as you can get. This is just somebody saying, hey, travelers, you might want to be careful in these places. Okay, moving on. Military checkpoints are frequent places such as Panama's Darien province, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico, and there are a way to combat drug trafficking. In police stations, English-speaking interpreters are a rarity. Some cities have a tourist police service that may be more helpful. If you are stopped at a military checkpoint, you may be asked to state where you're going, where you're coming from, and the reason for your trip. You may be asked to show your passport, immigration card, or driving license. Sometimes the police may even ask to search your vehicle, whereas other times they will wave you through with a smile. If you're stopped, be polite, helpful, and courteous at all times. Thefts do happen, particularly in larger cities and transit points such as bus stations. Most of it of the pickpocket or grab-and-run variety. To protect yourself, be wary of offers of food, drinks, sweets, or cigarettes from strangers on buses, trains, or in bars, as they could be laced with sedatives. Don't use a smartphone or laptop in public places, as it may attract the attention of thieves. Keep most of your money in a safe place and only carry pocket change, or whatever you can afford to lose for daily use. Purses or bags can be slashed or grabbed. Use a cheap, nondescript bag for walking around cities. Be wary of anyone pointing out a spilled substance, mustard, dog feces, on your clothes. It's a classic pickpocketing ploy. One thief helps to clean the victims, the other robs them. Avoid night buses. Those night buses are scary. It's worth splurging on taxis after dark, particularly in cities. Don't wander alone down empty city streets or in isolated areas. When possible, keep valuables sealed in a signed envelope in a hotel safe. Keep doors and windows locked. Don't camp overnight on beaches or in the countryside unless you can be sure it's safe. Get local safety news from guest house owners, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'm not going to keep going, but it goes on and on and on like this. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm overthinking this in terms of like how someone is going to respond. But I've read a lot of these, anti-immigrant screeds and anti-immigrant commentary and stuff. And so I know that people are just trying very hard to not believe that there are any good reasons why somebody might want to come here, or more to the point, like there's any good reason why we should let them. So, they'll say just like, well, yeah, maybe they have a good reason to want to come, but that doesn't mean we have to let them in. I mean, we should be able to choose who comes here and blah, blah, blah. This notion, it really just boils down to gatekeeping. It's like, who do I think is worthy of being my neighbor? And I think it's just important that we take a step back and realize that, no, we're not obligated to take care of everybody everywhere. I'm not talking in a paternalistic way, like we should, go out and just solve all the ills of the universe. Nobody can do that. And it's nothing that anyone is even suggesting that we try to do. The point, though, is that everyone should do what they can to help others. That is my belief. I think if you're in a position to help somebody else, you should do that. Not for your own sake, not for like, I want you to be more like me, or I want you to accomplish things that I think you should do, but just like, oh, you need something, I can give something here. And then let it go. Let go. If you give something to somebody, let it go. It's gone. It's done. It's now their problem. It's now their their situation to deal with. Um, it's not up to you, like, well, I only want my help to go to deserving people. Well, that's what we all want. I want, anytime I help somebody, I'm hoping that they will, be deserving in the sense that they'll appreciate getting some help, and that it will, spur them to action and to do great things for themselves or whatever. I mean, that's a nice ideal, but that can't be the criteria by which you decide whether or not you can do something for others. I mean, it just can't be. I don't know. I mean, maybe there are people with just a completely different sort of ethical or moral sense about their role in the world, or their role as being alive. But we have moved up from living in the trees and running around and picking fruit and such, to living in societies and having security and a certain amount of comfort in our lives, because we work as a society, because we work together as societies. We collect in groups and we say, all right, we're going to work together to promote the common good. This is how everyone gets ahead. This is how we've accomplished all the amazing things. We've gone to the moon. We've done all these different things. We can cure all these different diseases. We can do all these things because people have worked together to make it possible to do these things. No one could have done it alone. I remember probably the last election, or election before last or something, somebody made a comment about, I think it was Obama made the comment, like, talking about entrepreneurs and saying, well, you didn't build that. You didn't make the roads. You didn't create the infrastructure that you later used to promote your success. And of course, the Republicans just freaked out about that, like, oh no, I built it from scratch. I did all these things myself. Totally ignoring his point, which was, you were able to achieve what you were able to achieve because of what everyone else did working together to provide a platform for you to build from. You were able to get up here because you only had to start here. You didn't have to start all the way at the bottom. And by the bottom, I mean you didn't have to invent the tools that you used. You didn't have to invent the theories that behind the processes that made your thing work. You didn't have to go out and collect all the, these things yourself. You took advantage of the work of others to do something special with it, and that is the secret of your success. That doesn't mean that you didn't do something good, that you didn't do something like, well, you should be rewarded for your efforts or your thinking on this. It just means that you didn't do it by yourself. And you didn't. None of us do. There's an old thing, I don't remember where it came from, but it's the notion of standing on the shoulders of giants. And that is where we are, technologically speaking, culturally speaking, however you want to look at it. The reason we have all the things, the reason I have a computer, that I can speak into this microphone or look into this camera and you will see it or hear it now live somewhere miles away, or maybe after the fact, years after I've saying this, someone might see this and hear it on the other side of the world. That is because people have gotten together and made these things possible. If we forget this, if we say, oh, well, I've got everything I want now, I'm done, I'm not helping anybody else, then we stop growing, we stop evolving, we stop living, and we just stagnate, and then we slowly fall apart. So that's my belief system. If you want to understand where I'm coming from, that's where I'm coming from. Anyway, I have one more story. I'm going to try to get to it really quickly before I run out of time here. And this is kind of connected to everything I've just been reading, and sort of adds the final touches to it. It's entitled, I'm an Immigration Success Story. Still, this is how I know the system is broken. And it reads as follows. After an awful night's sleep, we awoke at 6 a.m. to culminate my husband's long process of naturalization. Later that morning, we entered a large room full of mostly immigrants sitting in burgundy chairs in front of a modest black stage decorated with U.S. flag bunting. The air conditioning was blistering cold. The song America by Neil Diamond played on repeat non-stop. Finally, we stood for the Pledge of Allegiance. Soon the lights went off, and along with the words, "A message from the President of the United States," his carrot-colored face appeared on a screen. My heart felt like an open wound. "My fellow Americans," he began, but before I heard the rest, my mind had left the building. Another very early morning, I drive for an hour to volunteer as a Spanish interpreter for a human rights lawyer who's surveying the conditions of a center where immigrants are being detained. I park on the curb outside and enter what can only be described as a prison, except it's not. I pass a security checkpoint and present my credentials to the men in charge, who are not police officers, but rather workers of GEO Group, a company that operates privatized corrections and detention facilities. I sit alone for a few minutes in an empty waiting room until the lawyers I'm working with arrive. She and I enter together. 3 10-inch thick metal doors are buzzed open before we're inside. It feels like a prison, except it's not. After a short corridor of bright white light, 4 steel doors are enclosing tiny interview rooms. We're instructed to wait in one. There's gray walls, gray floors, 3 chairs and a table. It looks like a prison, except it's not. An officer arrives with our first interviewee, a middle-aged man with a beard and a long ponytail. He's wearing an orange uniform. Throughout the interview, I move from one language to another, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, as I try my best to become an invisible voice between the man and the lawyer. He hasn't been outside in days. He mentions cruel punishments, forced labor, and security concerns. Before leaving, he talks about his uniform. They're color-coded, from navy blue to bright orange to stoplight red. Orange connotes mid-tier danger, like having been arrested for drug-related crimes. Navy means no criminal record, and red is reserved for those with a severe criminal history. Someone in red comes in, shackles on his hands and feet. Beneath his tattooed face, I see the eyes and the broken soul of a kid. He's barely 21. He came to the U.S. as a toddler and has no memory of the country he'll most likely be deported to. His family's precarious situation found them living in a dangerous neighborhood where he eventually joined a gang. "One bad decision defined my whole life," he explains. Smiling, he talks about the 2-year-old daughter waiting for him at home. He speaks of regret and longing for another chance at life. I sit there thinking this is a person who never even had a chance. The next interviewee I'll never forget. I introduce myself in Spanish, and upon hearing my accent from Medellin, she throws herself in my arms. "Mami, usted es colombiana," she yelps in excitement. We hug for a brief moment, and I hold back the river of tears that inevitably bubbles up. I refuse to overshadow her smile with my sadness. Sorry, I lost my place. She shares her story of being charged with the crime of re-entry. She was pulled over by a cop. Her kids were in the car as she was handcuffed. She was taking them to school. After being deported once, she had come back for them. They're 8 and 12. I struggle to find the words in Spanish to explain the legal difficulties of her case. A new deportation is inevitable, I finally say. She consoles us with her sunny smile. "To God, nothing is impossible," she answers, refusing to lose hope. A guard shows up, ready to escort her back. My heart feels like an open wound. During the drive back home, I can't stop thinking about our shared Colombian heritage. I can't stop thinking, what's the difference between her story and mine? In 1998, my father received an abduction threat. They had already kidnapped 3 people on the block his auto parts business was on. Violence had long become a norm in the country, and going to the authorities was like putting a Band-Aid on a cut that needed stitches, a laughable remedy that would only hold out for so long. Out of the blue, when I was 5 years old, we abandoned Medellin and fled to Miami. Despite having the financial means to abruptly leave Colombia, our family of 5 encountered many of the penalties that follow sudden immigration. My parents spoke exactly 0 words of English. We had no home, and cramming ourselves into a guest room at a distant relative's house was the best available option for weeks. My father says that for the first couple of months, he truly had no idea how it would all play out. In the first few drafts of this piece, I wrote about hard work as the sole reason we were able to stay in the U.S. and eventually become citizens. The story I'd heard my parents echo through the years. I wrote this after calling Mom and Dad to fact-check fragments of this essay, and as most immigrant parents, they continued to believe success is measured in gallons of sweat and tears. Still, as I pondered the answer of hard work on the page, the missing puzzle piece became even more evident. Many immigrants are unbelievably hard workers, and barely any achieve legal immigration status as a reward. Besides, fewer and fewer immigrants are being allowed to prove themselves worthy of citizenship through the customary hard work route. So what else is playing a crucial role in defining immigrants' destinies? I wish it weren't as simple as one word, but more and more I'm convinced that it is. Privilege. As obvious as it sounds, it's a matter that's largely left out of the immigration debate, despite its being what creates immense disparities in immigration experiences, even within people from the same country. As part of Colombia's upper class, who owned a large house and sent their children to private school, my parents had enough cash to arrange for 5 visas and pay for 5 plane tickets on demand. That's much more than what can be said of most Latin American citizens. Additionally, my dad had connections in the U.S. from his auto parts business. My parents didn't have to take low-paying jobs to make ends meet. They didn't have to move to questionable neighborhood to have a roof over our heads or break the law to keep our family together. Instead, they were able to use their savings to stay afloat during the transition and eventually establish a new life. Privilege allowed them to follow the law. Yes, their hard work and sacrifice, 2 unmistakable ingredients of the endangered American dream, eventually afforded our family U.S. citizenship, but that path would have never been available to us were it not for the fortunate circumstances we arrived with in the first place. To end the naturalization ceremony, they handed out little U.S. flags as the chirpy man on the podium recited the origin countries of people who'd become citizens that day. Folks from Chile, Haiti, Cuba, France, Russia, Colombia, Argentina, Belgium, and Mexico cheered and applauded. I locked eyes with my now Colombian-American husband, who was smiling 2 rows away and eagerly clapped for his accomplishment. Because this was an accomplishment, although he also had a leg up as the grandson of a New York native. He worked for years to meet the many requirements that eventually turned his inherited green card into the coveted blue passport. As I clapped, thoughts of the families separated at borders, the caged children who may never see their parents again, the people dying in detention centers, and the shattered American dream of thousands of human beings who never had a leg up pierced my heart. What's the difference between their stories and ours? Privilege. And that's how, despite being a success story, I know the system is broken. So that's the end of the show. I thank you for listening. This has been CU Immigration here on WRFU-LP Urbana and UP TV. And I hope you'll tune in and join us again. Thank you.